Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Shango. If you're new to using Substance Painter to do your texturing for Second Life or even other platforms, then this is the video for you. I want to let you know I'm one of the instructors for Mesh Masters Academy. It's a free Discord school that we've started. So if you want to learn how to do things like this and get into asset creation for selling for Second Life or VR chat or 5M or Roblox or whatever it is that you want to do, please check out the link in the description. Join the school. We do free classes all the time, and you can come learn from us live one-on-one. I'm also going to preface this by saying that every creator has their own individual preferences. Some of them might be different from what I'm about to show you. You're free to use whatever you like. None of this is set in stone. These are just my personal preferences and enough to get you going. So I'm going to go here to File, New, and be presented with my import settings window for bringing Mesh into Substance Painter so Substance Painter can understand what it is and how it works. For this drop down here for resolution, because we're working in Second Life, the max document resolution is 2048. So I'm going to leave it on 2048. However, if you have a nicer computer that can handle high graphics and stuff, you can use 4096 and then do all your stuff in a higher resolution, do all your texturing, your detail in a higher resolution. When you export it, you can export it as 2048 and it will give you better, nicer results. That's just something to keep in mind. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just going to use 2048. And then the rest of it is set up like this. If you want to pause and check these out, you can. And I don't have anything to worry about down here. All of these should be the same as they were when they came with Substance Painter. The only thing you will notice that's different is this drop down here at the top. Yours probably has one of these starter asset choices selected, which you can leave for now. Don't change it. I don't like to redo all these settings every time I go into Substance Painter, so I made a template one time that I can just reuse every time I import something, and everything's already going to be set up and ready to go. I'll show you guys how to do that. Now I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to choose my mesh. For right now, I'm just going to use this low poly bear that I've made in Blender. And at this point, you want to have your UVs done, your materials assigned, all that stuff, and then import it in. I like to use FBX. Some people like to use OBJ. Again, that's one of those preference things. But when I export things for Substance Painter specifically, I leave them in FBX. Totally up to you. Now I have my nice low poly bear. You can see it's just a pretty plain white material, right? And we're going to talk about baking. So baking normally refers to taking super high poly detail sculpts and baking that detail information into a lower poly version of the same mesh so that it's less taxing on the render engine or your video card overall. Does this mean we should still be baking lower poly mesh objects? Absolutely. I'm going to tell you why. Substance Painter is great for analyzing the mesh itself and building maps of where certain data should go. Things like shadows, bump maps, subsurface scattering, ambient occlusion. All that stuff Substance Painter needs to know so that when you're using generators or filters or things like that to do your texturing, Substance Painter has a better understanding of where everything is in 3D space. So let's take a look at why. I'm just going to go over here to my Smart Materials tab, and I'm going to grab my Steel Medieval Stylized Smart Material, and I'm just going to drag and drop it all over the mesh. Notice that I have all of this separated into the parts of the body with my materials. This is all actually one mesh object. It's just read as different material slots. And this was done when I exported it from Blender. So if you notice, we have some detail on this mesh, a little bit of bumpiness, a little bit of subsurface scattering going on. It's highly reflective and metallic, but this is not actually the way that this Substance Painter material preview looks. You see, this looks totally different. It's got edge wear, it's got some scratches in it. Why is that not showing up here? Well, because we haven't baked it yet. So even though this is still a low poly mesh, we need to bake all this information in with Substance Painter. So I'm gonna go up here to my croissant icon, the baking tab. You can access it with F8 or just click this icon. And we're presented with our baking screen. All of the material slots will be listed up here. And then you have your settings tabs, which are down here. So your common settings and all of these other settings. I only like to set these one time, which is why I made that template. I have two different templates. One is if I'm working with low poly mesh only, and the other is if I'm going to be taking high poly sculpts and projecting them onto that low poly mesh. So for the low poly, we're going to be doing them like this, and I'm going to pause a little on each screen so that you can copy the settings. We have output size 2048. I have use low poly mesh as high poly mesh checked. That means that we're only using a low poly mesh, and we just want to bake the information from this low poly mesh. And then down here in anti-aliasing, I have it set to 4. You can set this to higher if you want to. My normals tab, there's nothing in it. My world space normal, nothing in it. ID tab, I have the top mesh ID polygroup and then set to random. My ambient occlusion tab, go ahead and pause it and copy it. My curvature tab, For the low poly, I have this set to the deprecated option. So generate from normal map. If I'm baking from a low poly mesh and I just turn my details all the way up, the rest of everything should be the same. Position is like this. and my thickness is like this, with secondary rays turned all the way up. Once we have all that done, we can save all of this as a template. Let's go to File, More Save Options, Save as Template. Now you can call it whatever you want. Low poly bake settings works just fine, and then click Save. I already have mine, so I'm gonna leave it alone. Now all we have to do is click Bake. Now it's scanning the entire mesh and baking all of these details into maps that Substance Painter is gonna reference later. When it's done, the Return to Painting Mode button will light up again. Now, without having changed anything, you can see that the smart material we have on our mesh looks more like the preview of the smart material. And that's because Substance Painter now has the necessary maps that it needed to do all of this work. Now you can see if your mesh was looking different or flat or dull or not interesting or not like the things that you were trying to drag and drop onto the mesh, you can ask yourself if you have remembered to bake your mesh, because you need to bake this information in order for a lot of these smart materials to work. And you can see the difference yourself from how it looked before when it was like a mirror finish. Now I actually have my edge wear and my scattering, and you can see where my seams are and how these generators worked. So that's how you'd set up the template if you were going to be doing a low poly mesh object. Let's talk about if we were going to be using high poly sculpts to project details onto a lower poly object for either the entire mesh or parts of the mesh, and how we set that up. I now have a model that I've made a low poly version for that has a bunch of high poly sculpting information I need to project onto the low poly model. So all of my settings here are going to be the same as we did before. Now you see, as I zoom into the arms and stuff, this is all kind of lumpy, but it doesn't have the detail that it originally had when I sculpted it. So now I'm back in my baking tab, and you can see how I have all my materials split up. Now the difference between what I did before and now is I'm no longer going to be checking use low poly mesh as high poly mesh. I'm going to deselect this, and I'm going to tell it what my high poly mesh is. So in Blender, when you're doing this, you need to UV unwrap your low poly meshes. You don't need to UV unwrap your high polys at all. I usually do go onto my high poly and my low poly, right click and shade smooth before I do this. And you want to obviously make sure that they're in the exact same space. So have them on top of each other when you apply your transforms to make sure that they're directly intersecting with each other. So my first material slot was my arms, and I'm going to point this at my high poly arms. It's going to build a cage around my arms like this. If you have any red showing, you might need to expand your cage a little bit, which you can do by increasing this by, a small margin, or you could make this automatic, which is still in the experimental phase. But what this will do is it will keep the parts that it needs to keep small, close to your cage. And then if it needs more space, if it senses any red, it will automatically expand in that area. I like to use the automatic. It's kind of cool. Though if I go into my eyes, it's also using the same thing that I just selected because I didn't unlink all of these layers. So what I need to do is come here to my common settings. There's a little chain link button. If I click this, all of these are linked. So whatever I do to one will happen to all of them. So I need to select none and hit OK. Now I need to go in here and remove the ones that got added. Now that I've unlinked them, I could just go through to all of these and point them at their appropriate high poly mesh. And I have them all saved in the same folder to make this part easy. Usually what I do is I join everything together and export it as one complete mesh. So that's why the main one is called complete. And then for this, for my material slots, all my materials I have exported separately as their own individual high poly FBX. So now I have a cage around my entire object. It looks like the experimental setting is not liking my wings too much. So for the wings specifically, you see how I have this artifacting going on up here. If I just change this back to distance based, it will build a proper cage around my wings. It's not always perfect, but now you know how to troubleshoot it. And then I'm just gonna click bake. And it's gonna go ahead and scan my entire model and project those high poly details that I had in my original sculpts onto this lower poly version of the mesh so that I can get it all back. Now that we're back in painting mode, you can see I have all that detail back on my mesh. All that nice sculpting that I did in ZBrush has come back, and the actual mesh still looks the way that it did before. It just has all that detail projected back into it. So that's how you do if you were bringing your high poly stuff back onto your low poly stuff. One thing to note is not everything needs to have a high poly counterpart. For example, these eyeballs here, I could have just left as low poly eyeballs, and I would have just used the low poly mesh as the high poly mesh for the eyeballs themselves. That's the same with anything that you can keep low poly that you don't need a high level of detail on. you can mix and match how these are set up before you bake. So that's basically everything you need to know for import settings and for baking. Next video, we're going to talk about doing some basic texturing with Substance Painter and getting those textures from Substance Painter to wherever you need them. So back to Blender, to Second Life, wherever they need to go in multiple different versions. So PBR or the original version that Second Life supports, which is BlendFont. We'll talk about how to do that, how to do those settings. And once again, join our Discord, Meshmasters Academy. Free to attend a lot of the classes. You could come meet the students, showcase some of your work. It's generally a good vibe, good time. So I hope to see you there. Peace.